Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. My guest on this week's episode is an actress, a comedian, an author and an incredible advocate for people with autism. Since moving to Ireland from the States in January, she's been a very strong supporter of AsIam and has spoken quite widely about her sadness, about feeling compelled to leave her home as a result of current political policies in America. Rosie O'Donnell, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much to have me here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to talk about grief first of all.
Okay.
And grief for you has manifested itself, I think, in many different ways and many different forms throughout your life. But perhaps we could start by going back to when you lost your mum in 1973. Mm-hmm. And it actually makes me sad when reading this, because it was like 4 or 5 days before your 11th birthday.
That's right. She died on St. Patrick's Day, the 17th.
Wow.
And was buried on my birthday, the 21st.
On your birthday?
On my birthday was the funeral.
Wow.
And everyone who came, and there were many, because, you know, she was in the school parent-teacher conferences or whatever. What was that? What's that called?
PTA.
Yeah, PTA, that's right. And she also was in the parish council at Christ the King, our local church, Catholic church. And a lot of people knew her, and it was just such a tragic story. A woman with 5 children under the age of 39, or, you know, at the age of 39, wow, gets diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. And when they opened her up, they said, there's nothing we can do. And so she died shortly thereafter. You know, it was a quick descent, and it was jarring and shocking.
And how aware of it were you? Because obviously, you know, kids are sort of, parents might explain what's going on.
Not in 1973.
Really, yeah.
There was no Oprah. Nobody discussed their feelings. Irish Catholics not known for that. And, you know, I remember she first went to the hospital and we would go visit her there, and it felt very scary and weird. Then she came home for a while, but right before, in the early March, she went back to the hospital, and she had to have her friends help her to the car. I remember that, you know. And I remember thinking something bad is going to happen. And then I saw my dad in the playroom looking out the window, and I didn't have to face him. So I just said, Dad, is Mommy going to die? And he turned so I couldn't look at any part of his face, and, you know, put his nose to the corner of the room and said, we hope not, honey, we hope not. And that was all the discussion we got. The next thing, everybody was at our house on the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. And I remember waking up that morning and thinking, well, nothing bad can happen today, because today's lucky day for the Irish. And we're 100% Irish.
Yeah.
You know, our Irish identity was very big in Long Island in the 70s for our family. You know,
because your dad came from Donegal.
Yeah, well, his family was from there, and what happened was my grandfather was in some kind of trouble and sent his wife and the kids over. And then when he brought the older kids back is when my father was born. So he wasn't born here, but that's where he always said he was from, and that's where, after my mother died, he took us back to Donegal and Tyrone and Belfast, where his family was raised.
Wow.
And I still have cousins here, and they're in Belfast. They're in Ardglass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been up there a bunch of times to stay with them, and, you know, it's so lovely having family here. And I remember we first met them in 1973, right after my mother died that summer.
Wow. And that was like, so when your mum passed away on St. Patrick's Day, the days that followed.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
It felt like I would wake up at any moment and it was not going to be true. And it was very unsettling. And I remember my little brother Timmy, who's 5 years younger than me, who was born the day before me. So it was his birthday as well.
Oh.
And we both got a lot of gifts, and it just felt so wrong at your mother's celebration of life, or, you know, sad, morose death, as it viewed to me, you know, would get gifts. And he was little, and about a week after my mom died, he got very sick and was throwing up. And I lifted him up and walked through the vomit and held his head like my mother did to us as he got sick. And he turned and looked at me and he said, "You have to be the mommy now."
Wow.
And I remember it vividly to this day. And it really struck something. I was the oldest girl. And, you know, I thought, yes, I do. I guess I do.
So at 11 already, you were going, I've got to be the responsible.
I've got to be the mother.
Yeah.
And that's what I ended up doing. I adopted 5 children and had 2 foster kids. And at the time that my show was going on, and it was quite chaotic. And, you know, but I just thought, look at all the money and success I have. I can take 5 children. I can help 5 children. And when I saw these 2 foster kids, when my own children were 7 and 5, and Blake was a newborn baby, I went to the home where this young girl, 7 years old, had been raped in a 1-bedroom apartment in Little Haiti. I was living in Miami. And I saw it on the news, and it was by a 13-year-old brother's friend, and the mother was going to court for neglect. And I said to the doctor who came to take care of my son who was ill, "Do you know this girl? She was brought to your hospital." And he said, "My college roommate is her doctor." And I said, "Could you find out?" And I was very well known at the time, you know, if I could go visit her. And so they gave me the address of a home where foster children, girls, were kept in protective custody from their own parents. And I went to visit her. I met her. And when I came out, I signed up to be a foster parent. And I went to visit her many times after that. And one of those times, there were 2 kids the age of my kids, Cuban, dark-skinned, beautiful, holding hands. And I said to the guy who ran the organization, what's up with them? And he goes, "Well, they're going to a mental hospital." And I said, "They're 4 and 6. What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, they failed out of 30 foster homes." And I'm like, why? What possible thing could happen between a 6 and a 4-year-old that, you know? And he said, "Well, that's what we have to do. We don't have a family to take them." So I said, "Get in my car. I'll take them." Now, I did not tell my wife at home that I was doing this.
Okay.
I just showed up with 2 more kids and said, "It's just for the summer," which was a lie. It's just for the summer, you know. And it was, I believe, the beginning of the end, where she thought, this is way too much for me, you know.
Yeah.
It's way too much for most people. I understand that, and that's why.
Well, it's not quite bringing 2 rescue dogs up. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit more. This sort of, I mean, because obviously you're very well known for being so publicly kind and empathetic and sympathetic to people who perhaps are struggling, whether it be with their mental health or, you know, somebody who's comes from a minority group. Do you, this sense of support and showing compassion, did that come from a lack perhaps of compassion and support that you may have got when your mum died?
No.
Or did you feel fully supported?
No, I did not feel supported at all. But my feeling was more it's from the Catholic teachings that I learned in catechism and every Sunday at Mass, and that my mother strongly believed in. And, you could have like a picture on your refrigerator that you turn the refrigerator door and it changes. So it's like Jesus on the cross and John Kennedy, and Jesus on the cross, then John Kennedy. Like that's what it was about. The pride. Yeah, hologramish. The pride that my family had in the election of JFK, and the apparent devastation that my mother felt at his death, and then at his brother's and Martin Luther King. I remember it even though I was too young to remember it. So they're almost implanted memories from the lore of your family, But I remember a story that my mother told that Leonie, her best friend who lived across the street in number 16, we were number 17, she had a radio on and it said, John Kennedy has been assassinated. And then the radio went dead and never worked again. And that was like a big story in our family.
Yeah.
Like, whoa,
creepy.
Watch out, everyone. But this is somehow, connected to our faith, I believe. And, I would see sometimes, Jackie's mother, who was my best friend and still is.
And her mum helped
Totally.
bring you up.
She raised me. Now, and the other kids, it was Leonie. So the other 3 kids, it was Leonie was their main mother figure. But for me, it was Bernice at Jackie's house, And I was at Jackie's house when Bernice got the phone call to send me home. And I remember her being in the kitchen, and it was when the phones all had cords.
Yeah.
And I hear her say, uh-huh, and walk into the living room. Uh-huh, uh-huh. And then she stayed in the living room. The phone, she didn't walk back in to hang it up. And she said, Roseanne, you have to go home. And I said, why? She said, you just have to go home. And I couldn't see her face, but I heard her voice. Then Jackie's father, Richard, got up, put both hands on my forehead and my face, the side of my face, and kissed my forehead. And I thought, something has happened. And I didn't think she was dead yet, but I thought something has happened. And I went across the street, and I saw so many cars in our driveway and on the road. And I'm like, what the? And I walk in, and there are like 40 people packed in the kitchen and the dining room, and we're all seated at the kitchen table. And my father said, kids, your mother passed away. And I remember thinking, what the hell does that mean? Passed away. And then the adults started crying. And it sounded to me like wailing. And I just knew I had to get out of here. And I went up into my bedroom and put the dresser by the door and wouldn't let anyone in. And then my Aunt Josie climbed onto the overhang of our suburban home and through the window convinced me to come out through the roof, and that she would take me to Corvette's and buy me a transistor radio.
Wow.
And she did.
Wow.
And we got home in time for people to be having left.
Yeah.
So it was not as crazy. But, and then it's a blur, It's pretty much a blur. And, I mean, I very easily can drop into the feelings of it, and it still, disorients me.
Do you have particular triggers that you find every now and then?
Well, it's very funny. Since I've been here, all I think about is my family. All I think about, because I walk down the street and I see a 10-year-old girl, and she has my face from 1973 and my body type and my dark hair and my brown eyes, and I just go, my God, that's me. And then I see a 90-year-old woman in the Tesco looking at the fruit, and she has a round Irish face and white hair, and I think, if my mother had lived...
Would that be her?
Would that be her? And I see my father in the pubs with his hat on, his cap, little newsboy cap, and his cardigan beige, and his beige khakis that didn't fit him right because he would never spend money on himself. He would only spend the money on us kids, and I remember thinking, wow, he's had that same belt for years and years,
And you lost him 10 years ago?
The truth is, I don't really know exactly when he died. Now, this is an area that's quite upsetting for my siblings.
Okay.
So I try not to discuss the stuff with my dad because, when you have a shared childhood, it's like a timeshare condo, and you don't just get to use it whenever you want because other people own it too. And my fame and notoriety has caused them pain over some topics that I discuss, like this one, and some are negotiable to me, and some are not. And so that's all I could say. But he never met my children, and I only saw him twice in the last 20 years before he died. So it's a sad story.
But yet, you still see what he could have been.
Well, I see his direct image. You know how some Irish guys walk with their hands behind their back?
Yeah.
And, it was only my dad was doing that in America. Yeah. It wasn't like everybody was doing that. And I see the guy walking with his hands behind his back and skinny, but with a little bit of a belly and looking like a priest. My father looked like a priest. And I think to myself, that would be him had he lived, right?
Yeah. I think it's a weird thing. It's slightly comforting, isn't it? In some ways, when you see somebody and you sort of go, that's what they'd look like now.
Yes. Or when you always want your parents.
Yeah.
It's just a natural part of life. Animals, everyone. And I remember going to one foster facility that has been in a lot of controversy in, the 30 years since I went there, McLaren Hall in Los Angeles, that they also took children in protective custody. So Henry Winkler, who is a saint among men, had this event every year for McLaren Hall at a park near his house or at his house sometimes. And I went into the McLaren Hall this one year, and there was a gorgeous boy, and he had bandages all over his hands, and it didn't look like he had all his fingers. And I said to him, hey, dude, he was like 7. I said, what are you hoping for from Santa? Because we all would bring gifts. And he said, just to see my mommy. And I said, oh, I'm sure your mommy feels the same way. And then as we walked out of the room, the therapist there said it was his mom who held his fingers to his stove and burned them off. And all that child wanted was to see his mother.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of primal attachment that we have to our family of origin and to how we grew up. And it doesn't go away. It's not like, you can...
You can't switch it on, switch it off.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. You obviously moved here in January, and you've talked a lot about your reasons why, and everyone knows why. But that must, your move here, you're saying you think about your family more so than ever. You must miss them.
Yes.
Very much. You must miss your older kids, your friends. You didn't even have a passport, I think, did you?
No, I had a passport,
you had a passport,
but I rarely went anywhere.
So, your connection to your home, to the States, was massive.
Massive, right. And I never imagined when all these celebrities were saying, if he wins, I'm going to move. I never said it. Now, Fox News has said and claimed that I've said it.
Yeah.
And I've posted things that say, show me the video.
Yeah, but you've said many times you didn't say that.
I didn't do it. I never would say it because it would have been a lie.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have just blatantly lied, And when he got the nomination, I said to my therapist, I can't survive another 4 years with him. I know I can't, and she said, what's the plan? And I said, I would move to Ireland. It's the only country I would move to. I have family there that we had kept in touch with, and I know I can get citizenship because of my grandparents living here. And she said, let's start to make that plan. And we did. And the first thing I did was talk to Clay.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a very dangerous situation in America now. And for people who have always stood up to him, it's a dangerous place to be here. And for trans people and trans kids and gay people, it's not a safe place to be. And for women, they've taken away our rights that I remember fighting for in the early 70s. And without question, and they're arresting women who miscarry, and it's like The Handmaid's Tale. And I knew enough about history to know what comes next. And I also knew about Trump's cruelty firsthand. So even though no one in my life believed that I would do it, I knew that I would.
But that must have been a heartbreaking decision, because you were leaving so much behind. You have left so much behind, and stuff I'm sure you're missing out on with your older kids and with friends.
Yeah, my daughter is graduating from college in May, and I won't be able to go. You know, you don't know what he's going to do when he arrests people without warrants and sends them to other countries to torture camps and prison camps. And, you know, it's terrifying. Yet the Heritage Foundation announced their plans in Project 2025, and it was released to the public. And I assumed that half of the public would have read it, but it's not true. Hardly anyone read it. I read it. It was hard to believe that they would ever have the audacity or the ability to get away with what they have gotten away with. Blatant racism and misogyny and racism. And I knew I had no choice. My friends didn't know, because I don't know that they all have such incapacitatingly big feelings.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, you know, you also, as you're saying, like, your primary reason for moving here was for Clay as well.
Correct.
And Clay has autism.
Yes.
And obviously supports for children and people with autism are being taken away.
Yes.
So therefore you'd no option. Really.
I had no option. And that's what, you know, few of my friends, they thought, she's not going to do it. Just like when I left my show. I left my show, it was still very, very popular, and I was making crazy, insane money. The kind of money that if you make that for 1 year, you don't have to work again. And I had done it for 6 years.
Wow.
And that was a lot.
Yeah.
And they said, but you'll never be able to walk away from this money. And I said, listen, if you have X amount of millions of dollars and you think you need X amount more, you've wasted the reason for living.
Yeah.
To me, that's just a basic given of life, right? That's a given. I don't understand these people like Elon Musk and the multi-billionaires who decide that more is always better, and it simply isn't.
Now you're here.
Yes.
Clay is happy.
Very happy. She said it's better here.
How's the move? Because often...
Listen, I have been shocked, but she has such resilience and such strength. And the day after the election, she walked into her class and said, well, I'm moving to Ireland. And they said, why? And she said, because the president hates my mom. But to be fair, she hates him just as much.
Brilliant. That's what I actually love about kids with autism. Is
they cannot lie. They will not lie.
But there's no filter.
No.
It's like
I said to her one day, did you put Liam in a headlock in class? She said 3 times.
Yeah.
I'm like, why did you do it? And I think because he has something similar to Tourette's, where he can't help but sing this one song.
Oh, right, okay.
And it annoys her sensory issues.
Yeah.
And so she goes, when I put him in the headlock, he stops. I'm like, well, that's great. You're not allowed to touch another child in school. You know, and we went to therapy for that. For like six months of Wednesdays.
Yeah.
And finally, the last day, she's like, you know, I'm so sick of coming here. Wednesday is my half day. You ruin it. And all you do is play Uno with me. How is that helping me not put my hands on other people? I swear to you, I will never touch another kid. Get me out of here. The poor therapist.
Sounds very familiar.
Yes.
So they're doing great.
They're doing great. And it is a they, them, but it's so hard for me. I had it tattooed on my wrist in her handwriting so that I would remember to say it. And whenever I say she, she says, your tattoo's not working.
Oh.
Yeah. I try my hardest. It's very difficult to do. And not that should give anyone the reason to not try.
Absolutely.
to totally ignore what someone's perceived identity is and what they know about themselves. How dare you say you can't be referred to this way? And some of my friends were very, very upset that I let them change their name.
Of course. And was that Clay's own decision?
Yes.
Wow.
She used that name Clay on her Roblox account.
Okay.
So she was online as Clay for a while before she said to me. And what they said to me, what they did is they walked into my bedroom when they were 9 with all their stuffed animals. And they said, all these plushies are non-binary. I said, no kidding. What does that mean? She says, it means they're not a girl and they're not a boy. I said, oh, wow, that's fascinating. She said, do you think you're non-binary? I said, no, I'm an OG lesbian. And she's like, what is OG? Original gangster. Original gangster lesbian. That means I always knew I was a girl. I loved being a girl. I was a tomboy. I loved playing baseball and basketball and sports. But I never wanted to be a boy. And I was never confused that I was a boy. And they said, okay. And about 2 months later, they said, remember what I told you about my stuffies? I said, yes. They said, well, that's me too. And I said, fantastic. Congratulations. And about a year after that, she said, I went to school and everyone was calling her Clay to pick her up. And I got in the car and I said, hey, do you want me to call you Clay too? And they said, no, I know how hard it would be for you. I want you to call me Dakota still. So that happened for about a year. And then I said, I think maybe it's time for me to try. And they said, okay, great. And it's been Clay ever since. And somehow it was easier for me to do than the pronoun because I look at her and I see Clay now. I don't see Dakota still.
Yeah.
And who knows where it's going to go or what it's going to lead to. Or, kids who are autistic often have gender issues and body dysmorphia. It goes hand in hand. And we were lucky enough in Los Angeles to work with the UCLA Autism Clinic. And they would come to our house and do therapy once a week with her. And it was just an unbelievable service. And they sent us to a psychiatrist who deals with kids this age with gender dysmorphia of some type. And it was very helpful. Very, very helpful. They have a lot of services in places like LA and New York, not so much in the middle of the country or in the South. But I was fortunate enough as a privileged person to be able to access all of this, in ways that most families are not.
Well, I think that's sort of across the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
When you're looking for, there's the queues and the waiting lists for therapies or support are so long.
Right.
They're long anyway, whether you pay for it or not.
Right.
But if you can pay, you're the few rungs higher up.
Right, exactly. Which isn't fair at all.
No, it's not fair. And it shouldn't be that way because I think you've talked about the loneliness that can go with having a child with autism.
Yes, and I didn't even realize it until I went away to get trained for our service dog.
Yes,
we have an autism service dog, which is free in the United States. So I don't know. I talked to many people at the Autism Sensory Fest Fair yesterday.
Yeah.
And a lot of them said, oh, we've tried to get a service dog, but it's an 8-year wait.
Yeah, it's difficult.
And I'm like, and it cost a lot. I'm like, oh, my God, I wish I could get these people.
That can be your next project.
Yeah, maybe make it free,
Yeah.
The Machinists Union did that. For the Guide Dogs of America, which is one of the big nonprofit facilities in Los Angeles for guide dogs. And there was a man who was a machinist, and he was losing his sight, and they wouldn't let him get a dog because they said he was too old. So the union voted to make their own guide dogs chapter so nobody would be turned away and if they didn't have the money or the resources or the age right. And although there is an age limit on the autism dogs, they said you have to have a child under the age of 12.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not exactly sure why. I think what they said was because the dogs, usually they're labs. They don't live long. They're big, and so they live 8 to 12 years, I think it is. And so maybe it's that maybe that's part of the reason. I never found out an exact reason why it's only 12. And part of me wishes that it wasn't, because, a 14-year-old with autism who's dysregulated and this dog changed Clay's disposition.
This is Kuma.
Kuma, yes.
And you got Kuma as part of a documentary that's just come out on Disney Plus.
Yes,
yeah.
I did. I got the dog first, and then I went back to the facility and said, this has so profoundly changed my life. How can I help you guys publicize this? And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, who are the other celebrities that have gotten service dogs here? They said, you're the first. Wow. I said, are you kidding? They said, no. And I'm like, oh, my God, I have to help you. Okay, let me make a documentary. And then we started with the documentary. And luckily, we turned it around fairly quickly. We wanted to get it ready for Autism Awareness Month, which is April. So it's out in America on Hulu. And we're going to do a screening here.
And it's called Unleashing Hope.
Unleashing Hope, yes. The true story of service dogs and autism. And we're going to do a screening here for AsIam in May.
Brilliant.
And I'll let you know, so maybe you could announce it or whatever. And people will give a donation to come in. And then after the documentary, Adam Harris, the head of AsIam, and I will do a talk back and answer questions.
Super. And this all came back around as well in quite an unexpected way. I was reading, like how you became aware of service dogs.
Yes. It was Lyle Menendez.
Yeah.
I know,
because we know about the Menendez brothers here because of the Netflix documentary.
Yes.
And I think, there's a lot of empathy and compassion for those two brothers, him and Eric.
If his brother Eric was a girl, Lyle would be lauded as a hero. Because that father was sexually abusing and torturing that child, as he did to Lyle before it stopped when Lyle was 8. He told his cousin, and the cousin told the mother, and she might have warned the father, and the father started with the younger brother and said, I will kill you if you tell anyone. And they lived the first 20 years of their life in a tortured hell. Yeah,
like they lost their childhood. And now
they never had a childhood.
Exactly, but now they don't have an
adulthood
either.
They've been in jail for 35 years. 35 years. Wow. So he had written me in 1996 when my show just started, because I had been on the Larry King Show and voiced my support for them and my praise for Leslie Abramson, who was the lawyer. And he wrote me a very long letter and was very honest and truthful. And, he said he hoped that I had not gone through some of the things that made me so empathic. That's what he was saying,
Okay.
And I was like, wow, what an interesting man. But I never wrote him back because Barbara Walters had just interviewed them, and she was represented by my publicist, Cindy Berger. So Cindy would always take her out once a month, and usually I would go with, because Cindy either had to drive home and couldn't go to dinner after, so I would take Barbara to dinner. And she said, oh, Rosie, he's a murderer, and he's a hypocrite, and, he's very manipulative. And I was like, okay, I'll just let it be, because I didn't know what to do. But then I saw the most recent documentary, Brothers Betrayed or Boys Betrayed, which was before Monsters, which talked about the new evidence that Roy Roselio from Menudo had been brutally raped in the Menendez house by Jose Menendez, and he only came out with it recently. And there was also a letter found that Eric had written his cousin Andy, who has since passed away, that they found that was not entered into evidence, where months before he was talking to his cousin about the sexual abuse that continued to happen. So there's really no reason besides, the DA's illegal denying them a defense in their second trial, because they had just lost the OJ trial and were trying to save face. So they took away their right to talk about the abuse. And the first 2 juries, because each boy had a separate jury, were hung juries. And they didn't want that to happen again. So they said you cannot enter in as a defense the sexual abuse. And they were found guilty and given life without the possibility of parole, and then cruelly separated to not go to jail together.
Because they did ask to be together,
yes.
didn't they? Yeah. Wow. So then Lyle and
Lyle
dogs.
and I became friends, and on Mother's Day 3 years ago, his wife called me, and then he called me. He has a wife of 30 years, who's a lawyer and a very smart woman.
Yeah.
And kind and loving and very supportive and helpful. And he called me the next day, and we talked for 3 hours, Mother's Day. And he would call me 2-3 times a week from prison on their tablets that they get, and be able to FaceTime sometimes. And I was sleeping, Clay was sleeping in the bed with me still then, and he was privy to our conversations, like as we, were hanging out in bed, and he would talk to Clay, and, she would say things to him about, where he was. You're in jail, right, Lyle Menendez? Yeah. Like, oh, God, what is this doing to her psyche, But, I don't know. I have compassion for them.
But, it opens the...
Yeah.
Word,
I explained to her that it's never okay to kill anybody, and that when it happens sometimes, there are circumstances that caused it, and we have to look at them as well. Yeah. But it's never a good idea. I tried to, run that home, but what she took away, who knows,
But you're also showing her compassion.
Yes.
And empathy, because people do things, but then,
yes. Yeah, in fact, we had taught her brother Blake empathy. He didn't speak really till he was 5, and probably would have been autism diagnosis or some ADHD or some kind of, but my friend Jackie quit her job, my best friend, to be his one-on-one at school, all the way through high school and then into applying for college. And it saved him. And I taught him, to say this when he was 3, or to understand this. That's my mama. She loves me the most. I just said it to him over and over. Every time you look at me, here's what I want you to think. That's my mama, and she loves me the most. Right? And he learned empathy, and he was very feral, kind of like an animal. He knew every animal sound, could identify every animal.
Wow.
And when he was about 7, we were in Miami, and we were scuba diving, snorkeling right near our dock. And it started thundering and lightning, which he was very afraid of. And he goes, get out! And he runs to the ladder and scurries up. And I have my flippers on, and I'm holding his mask, and I have the snorkels, and I'm trying to get up the ladder. And he stopped and looked at me. And so I let go and fell back in. And I said, Blakey, can you help me? And he said, I'll go to the house and get help. And he ran to the house, and he got a grown-up, and they came out and helped me. Now, I didn't really need help getting up. But then all we spoke about for months was when Blakey saved Mommy. Wow. By being brave and by caring and by going into the house and by not thinking of himself.
Exactly.
And over, that's my mama. She loves me the most. And, it got in there. This is the most compassionate, loving child that I've had. He is my heart. He is similar to me in his political beliefs and his...
Will he visit?
Oh, yes. They're coming this summer.
Oh, wow.
She's a special ed teacher. His wife, he got married in August. It was the most beautiful day of my life. I couldn't imagine that it would feel like it felt.
Yeah.
And the missing of my mother was intense that day. Yeah. Just feeling like, imagine she was here to see this, And he is really quite literally something else. They had it set up that first the grandparents came out, and then the moms came out. And when I came out, he started sobbing. And I'm walking up the alley towards him, and I start sobbing. And then the audience starts out. And then I'm holding him for like it took us a while to recover.
Yeah.
And it was so unbelievably beautiful. It was really overwhelming to me. And I just am so happy for them. And, it will be very, very difficult when they have a child to not be with them. I can't imagine right now that would be something I would be able to live through because, I haven't had the chance to grandparent my daughter's children. She has 4 children, but is in quite a state of addiction, and it's very, very sad. And she had a troubled beginning, and I feel for her, I feel for her, but it's been like a Lifetime movie that you don't want to star in, So, but I'm anxiously awaiting for, my other ones to have children and, have a beautiful experience of what is added to your life when you have one,
Well, you never know. Maybe when he comes here in May, he'll just fall in love with living here.
Well, that's what I say to him all the time.
I'm sure you can use your powers of manipulation.
She's very close to her family.
Okay.
And she has a Down syndrome brother that they will take care of when the parents are gone. Wow. So that's a commitment that they made to
you
Stephen.
really have taught him
Yes,
empathy.
Exactly.
Wow.
He has tremendous empathy. And, he writes me and texts me a lot, and he'll write, "I miss your mama," And I'm like, "I miss you too, my son, And I do. And he can take all the emotions that I have to give him,
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, hopefully you'll get nice sunny weather in May or August. Is that when?
And he's going to be done in June or July.
Okay.
Because Teresa had to get her passport changed to his name.
Okay.
Because she took his name, our name. Yeah. And so that when that comes in, they'll be ready to make the plans.
Yeah. No.
Which is thrilling.
That'll be great. And then you just have your plan.
Exactly.
Try and sort of even do a 6 months of the year here.
Well, my little daughter, 22, is graduating college, and she wants to be in production behind the scenes. And she works the camera at her college on the lacrosse games and the soccer games.
Yeah.
And sends me pictures from her on the camera, And I got her an internship here for when she comes in the summer at the ASIam Ireland AM.
Ireland AM, yeah.
The one show I did. And this woman, Sinead, so nice. And she said, if you want me to help her or give her, she was asking about her. And I said, "Oh my God, she would be thrilled," because last summer when I did And Just Like That, an episode of And Just Like That, I said to Cynthia Nixon how sad I felt that when she wanted an internship for the summer, that summer, I couldn't get her one because, my talk show was many years ago. It's not like I could call up Kelly Clarkson and go, "Can you hire my kid?" You know what I mean? I don't know. And also there's something about them earning it and something about, but she worked for Cynthia. Cynthia said, "I'll hire her as my intern." And she worked on the set for the summer. And she loved it. Amazing. She was never so happy. And so she'd like to do films or TV and learn the trade. She loves cameras and she loves doing the camera. But she said she also might be interested in props because she's very observant.
Wow.
And she would be good at replacing the prop in the same way as the last shot.
Just make sure there was steam coming out of a teapot.
Exactly.
It was supposed to be hot tea.
Exactly.
I'd have to ask you about Just Like That.
Yes.
Because that is something that is very popular here.
Yes.
How was that?
The greatest experience.
Wow.
I've been friends with Cynthia Nixon for many years, and I've loved her advocacy, and I've loved who she is and how she represents herself and her life, and I love her wife. I love her kids. I think she's an amazing mother and an amazing woman. So when she called me and said, "They've written something for you," I'm like, I am in. Thank you, and yes. And Michael Patrick King, who created the show Sex and the City and that, he wrote me this wonderful, wonderful part. And it was just one episode. So everyone's like, you're going to be on it again? I'm like, no, one. I don't want to crash their show and, add me to their wonderful
it's a pretty cool
mix.
show to be in.
Oh, my God,
if you have to
yes.
do a show.
No, I love to do
Yeah.
a show. I love to act. I love to be a character in something. And those are like the highest level performers.
Yeah.
Sarah Jessica is pretty amazing.
There's the
Kristen.
Donegal connection as well, because she's a
Yes.
house
Yes.
in Donegal.
Exactly.
So you can go up there and stay up there.
Right, I could.
No.
Matthew and I are born the same day.
No way.
Yeah, and the same year.
Wow.
Yeah,
You
we're
see, it's
exactly the
all
same
everything
age.
aligns.
Yes.
Yeah. So while you're here, do you think you'll look for a few parts? Or you
Oh,
just,
yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm in talks with the people doing the new Sophie White series
Okay.
to play her mom,
Wow.
which I would love to do. And I've told them, just, tell me when I start and
Yeah.
I will be there. I love her writings. I love
Yeah.
her books. She's actually in the town that I'm in Sandy Mount.
Yeah.
And I think she's so talented. And I was lucky enough to have lunch with her at the Dillon Hotel, which is my favorite place to get lunch. It's unbelievable, their poke bowl.
Yeah.
It's very expensive, but it's
It's
worth
very
it.
expensive,
It's
I was
worth
about to say.
it. Yeah, I was going to say, don't think, you save up and on your birthday,
Yeah.
go get that. And you can get it with caviar, which is a little more
There's
expensive.
yes, that's
but
a bit, as we'd say in Ireland, we call that notions. So if
Notions.
somebody has something that is sort of a bit sort of champagne lifestyle
Yes.
on lemonade wages, we call it notions.
Oh, no.
So there you go. That's your new
Well,
Irish.
when I went in there
expression.
and I saw that it was this poke bowl with, caviar, two of my favorite things, and I saw how much it cost. And I said to the guy, is that really what it costs? And the guy, maitre d', is like, yes, but it's fantastic. And I said, I will take it, sir. And now whenever I come in, he says, poke bowl? I said, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
He's probably put himself on commission.
I
now,
bet. He
with
probably
this
never
manager.
sold them for lunch until I moved in.
Yeah, there you go. Listen, Rosie, thank you so much
Thank
for coming
you very
on
much.
the
And
Grief
thanks for
Pod.
your persistence and your understanding about me trying to find a good time.
Look, enjoy Ireland for
Okay,
as long
thank
as
you,
you're
I will.
here.
I
Go
sure
and
will.
get loads of poke bowls.
I will. And
loads
I want to
of
thank
parts.
Jennifer today.
Yes, we have to thank Jennifer.
The
we
Uber
send this to
driver
her.
dropped me off at the wrong place and told me to go into the wrong house. And this lovely Irish woman had a blue bathrobe on just out of the shower. And she said, you look familiar. I go, this is not the podcast place, I take it. She's like, no, love, but where do I know you from? I'm like, I'm an American actress. And you're on the Late Late Show. I said, yes, I was. And she let me in and she helped me find you and find
Yeah,
this
she
because
was
my
lovely.
WhatsApp was in not rebooting or something, and that's where I had your contacts.
Yeah.
But we found you, didn't we?
We got there in the end, Rosie. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram at Grief Pod Series.